Hello and welcome to Good Nightmare, a podcast where we love both cats and dogs equally. Today's episode is about a famous person from history, or rather infamous. Though instead of looking at the myths and the legends that surround her name, we'll be looking more into the reality and as many of the facts as we can. I have no doubt that almost every single one of my listeners will remember this person. And you've probably listened to a few podcasts about her before, so hopefully you'll enjoy this one just as much. Elizabeth Bathory is infamous in the podcast community. The Countess is coined as the most violent female murderer, with rumours of torturing maids and bathing in their blood. Though much of her reputation comes from the passing of rumours throughout the years. Similar to fairy tales, historical crimes are often picked up and retold again and again until the facts of the case become distorted. In today's episode, we'll look at Bathory's violent history, both the exaggerations and the facts. Elizabeth Bathory was born on 7th of August 1560 or 1561 in Hungary to a wealthy and noble family. She was daughter to George Bathory and Anna Bathory, and younger sister to Stephen. She was raised as a Protestant, one of the most common forms of Christianity, and learned Latin, German, and Greek as a young woman. At 10 years old, Bathory was engaged to Ferenc Nadasdy in what was a political arrangement. Engagements at such a young age during this time were not unusual. Bathory's social standing was higher than that of Nadasdy, so she kept her name upon their marriage. Nadasdy also adopted Bathory's name, which would be a sign of his improved social standing. His family shared a similar wealth to the Bathorys, but the Bathorys were a much older and more influential family. At the age of 13, Bathory allegedly gave birth to a child by a peasant boy outside of her engagement. The child was rumoured to have been given away to a local woman to care for, though, as with much history, there is little documentation to confirm these statements. By 15 years old, Bathory was married and had moved to the Nadasdy castle. Her husband was often away in Vienna on business before going to war. His absence meant that Bathory would spend a majority of her time alone. She was an incredibly savvy woman and had plenty to keep her busy. She would take over the business affairs for her husband and took over the care of their estates. Caring for the estates in this time also included providing medical care for the wounded. Bathory was an advocate for young women and families, and is reported to have assisted a young girl who was brutally assaulted, which resulted in a pregnancy. Bathory was widely known, and not necessarily liked by her would-be adversaries. We all know how the story goes when a woman gains power. Bathory would go on to have 5 children within her marriage. Anna, born 1585, Orsolia, born 1590, Catalin, born 1594, Andres, born 1596, and Pal, born in 1598. It was rumoured she also had another son, though his existence was unconfirmed, as he did not appear in her final will. Elizabeth's husband passed away in 1604, and left his widow and children in the care of one Georgi Thurzo, whom he had trusted during his life. This was the very same man who would eventually investigate Elizabeth's alleged crimes. Georgi was a man born to nobility. At only 17 years old, he took a military and political career, which he used in battle against the Ottomans. He was a passionate Lutheran and built Lutheran churches on his estates. He issued a decree in 1610, which from Latin translated to whose realm, his religion. A decree which meant that the people of a particular ruler's land would be ruled under that leader's religion. He was fiercely loyal to the Habsburg Emperor until his death in 1616, and was most famously remembered for being the judge of Elizabeth Bathory. With this much power, competition and conflicting religions between himself and Bathory, it's not hard to imagine that there may have been an underhanded motive in his conviction of her. It was in Bathory's husband's final years, 1602 to 1604, that rumours began to spread through the village of her alleged crimes. In 1610, King Matthias II employed Thurzo to investigate the validity of these rumours. Notaries were also ordered to collect evidence from the villagers, and there was reportedly testimony from over 300 witnesses. Witnesses being a term which is used very loosely here. At trial, only 13 of these witnesses' testimonies and 4 defendants would be produced. The rumours were that Bathory had been torturing and murdering young girls. Her victims were said to be 10 to 14 years old, mostly local peasants, who were lured with the promise of good work and pay. Bathory would recruit these girls herself, it was said, before sending others out to have young girls kidnapped. There were accusations of severe beatings, burning and mutilation, as well as Bathory biting the girls' faces or bodies, freezing them, starving them, or even covering them in honey and leaving them covered in live ants. There were also suspicions of cannibalism. Bathory was allegedly arrested in the midst of one of these torture sessions. However, this was likely an exaggeration, as she had been detained prior to the discovery of any victims. This was only one of the holes in the case against her. It was decided that an execution or an ongoing trial would be detrimental to the reputation of the area's nobility, and so it was suggested that Bathory be taken to a nunnery. Ultimately, however, she was instead sentenced to house arrest. Bathory's accomplices in the crimes were taken to trial in her place, and all but one of her servants testified against her. At trial, there were 36 victims reported. That number then climbed drastically to 50, and then 200 victims. In recent history, it's been suggested there may have been up to 650 victims, though we all know what time and talk can do to a case. The official reported amount of victims is 80. Records pertaining to these victims, 32 letters written by Bathory herself, are stored in the Hungarian State Archives in Budapest. Bathory's house arrest was atypical. She was bricked into a room with a window only large enough for the passing of food and for ventilation, and she remained here for 4 years until her death. On August 21, 1614, Bathory had complained of having cold hands, and by morning, she was found dead. Her body was initially buried in the family crypt, but there's no record of where it now resides. Her alleged accomplices were not so lucky. 4 of her servants and friends were also arrested under suspicion. 3 of them were executed, and 1 sentenced to life imprisonment. If her story sounds unbelievable to you, you're not alone. I myself am on the fence about this one. There are several investigative authors who believe that her crimes were fabricated as part of a political coup. Remember King Matthias, who ordered the investigation? He owed Bathory a significant amount of money, and Georgie Thurzo worked for him. Upon Bathory's trial and arrest, the king's debt was cancelled. Recently, Laszlo Nagy and other historians have defended Bathory against the claims of her dark desires. It's been put forward that her downfall at the hands of Thurzo may have been inspired by his desire to rid himself of a powerful political rival. In fact, Thurzo had already been assisting King Matthias in overthrowing and gaining control over other Hungarian nobles. As mentioned, Bathory's work as an estate owner meant that she tended to the ill and wounded, providing medical aid. It has been suggested that some of her victims were actually patients. Having 300 witness testimonies sounds simply impossible, or at least improbable. For that many people to be eyewitness to these events would mean a wild disregard of any self-preserving measures on Bathory's parts. It's been suggested that these testimonies were gained when the supposed witnesses were put under duress. In law, Bathory has been likened to a vampire. It was said that she would bathe in the blood of her victims in order to maintain her youth, and was even alleged to have had sex with the devil himself. To some, accusations such as this may further discredit her alleged crimes. Where do you feel the truth lies? Is Bathory an innocent victim of a political coup, the young woman who wanted to assist and save others like herself? Or was she the devil in human form, luring children to her home only to perform the cruelest and most unthinkable crimes against them? Or perhaps, was she somewhere in the middle? If you'd like to discuss this case with me or my other listeners, you can join us on our Facebook group, Good Nightmare Pod. You can also catch me on social media, on Instagram or Twitter at goodnightmare_s. And if you'd like to get in touch directly, feel free to shoot me an email at goodnightmare_s@outlook.com. I'm always happy to hear from my listeners. You can also send through case suggestions if there's anything that you would like me to cover. I tend to cover historical cases if we're looking at murders or crimes, so please keep that in mind. Stay tuned for a promo from another podcast, which I highly, highly recommend. And until next time, sweet dreams.
This is Mike Morford. You may know me as co-host of the true crime podcast, Criminology. I'd like to invite you to listen to my new podcast, The Murder in My Family, which is out right now. In each episode, I discuss a murder case and include an interview with a family member of the victim to discuss the aftermath of the murder. Some of the cases I cover are well known, and others you probably haven't heard of. And I have several episodes currently available for you to binge on, including episodes about the Delphi murders, the Golden State Killer, and the Colonial Parkway murders, just to name a few. Here's a small sample. Bill Thomas is the brother of Kathy Thomas, and he agreed to talk with me about the murder in his family.
Well, Mike, at the risk of sounding like every other proud big brother around the world, Kathy was an amazing person.
And one thing I wanted to get across is how important it is that the victims that I'll be talking about in these cases aren't just statistics. You know, they were real people. They're more than just murder victims.
For me, knowing that he has a family and that he gets to see his kids every day and that he gets to be there for his kids growing up, like, it's not fair. He was the most funniest man I've ever met. He was everybody's friend.
New episodes come out on Saturdays, and you can find The Murder in My Family wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe today so you don't miss an episode.